In today's camera news, Canon has told the company Viltrox that they are no longer allowed to produce Canon RF lenses for their specific lens mount. What does that mean and what exactly happened? We're going to go over that in today's video. But first, if you're new here, my name is Geoff Fagien. I'm a filmmaker, DP based in South Florida, and I actually use all RF mount cameras right now. I use the RED Komodo, Canon R6, and R7. What's interesting to see is there really aren't any third-party lens options for the RF mount that have autofocus. The only two companies that have really tried are Viltrox and Samyang. Before we get into the main part of the story, a little preface to it is that a company called Samyang was making RF lenses for the RF lens mount that had autofocus. And earlier this year, it was reported that they stopped selling any of their RF lenses. They just stopped production. There were no reasons given why. They were just telling people that they stopped production. Now we see from an original forum post on dpreview.com and then covered in an article on photorumors.com that a customer of Viltrox contacted them to see why they were no longer selling RF lenses on their website, and Viltrox responded to the customer letting them know that Canon has told them to cease all productions of any lenses that had an RF lens mount. Now, you can take this a few different ways, but I think the main thing we see here is that there are a bunch of other companies doing third-party RF lenses, but they're all manual lenses. Me specifically, I have one from TT Artisans, and then I also have the Sirui anamorphic 35mm, which is a fully manual lens. Now, RF kind of stands out compared to all of its competition, like Sony E-mount, for instance, because Sony E-mount, there are tons of third-party options. One question I've been seeing a lot is how come we're not getting third-party RF lenses when there's tons of third-party EF lenses? And the first thing to go over is that the RF lens mount was actually only released in 2018, so it's still relatively new. And the EF lens mount has been here for over 30 years, so there's been a lot more availability of the EF lens mount for years. Canon just happened to use it for many, many years. Now, even in recent memory, we started really only seeing really amazing third-party lenses over the past 10 years, which means that when those lenses started to come out, the EF lens mount was still out for 20 years. So it's really hard to compare the EF lens mount to the RF lens mount. Now, on the flip side, what seems to be happening is Canon is not licensing their metadata or any of their internal electronics to anybody right now, even if they want to license it from Canon. So these companies like Viltrox or Samyang, it's been suspected that they're just reverse engineering these lenses, and that's part of the reason why when Canon would put out a firmware update, all of a sudden these lenses from Viltrox, Samyang, they would be bricked. They just would not work properly, and then these companies would have to come out with the firmware, and it was really just a circle because Canon would come out with the firmware update, Viltrox or Samyang would then have to come out with their own firmware update in order to fix the issues that happened. One could ask, did these firmware updates have items in them that pretty much disabled the use of these third-party lenses? And that's really where Canon has the upper hand here. All of these companies are based in China, and they definitely play it fast and loose with copyright IP. If Canon has the upper hand, they're the only company making RF cameras. They could literally disable the ability for these third-party companies to have their lenses work on the camera body. It becomes a situation where even though these companies can skirt IP law, it doesn't matter if their lenses are no longer going to work on these cameras. So I think that's why in a normal situation they would kind of give them the finger, but in this situation they're bowing down to Canon. All Canon has to do is just keep disabling these lenses via their firmware. It's interesting to see what's going to happen with the RF lens mount because their biggest competitor, which is Sony with the E-mount, E-mount isn't necessarily open source, but Sony does offer third-party companies to make Sony E-mount lenses, which has really opened up the Sony E-mount because a lot of people that I even know don't use actual Sony lenses. Anyone that I know that uses Sony E-mount cameras, most of them use third-party lenses and really good quality third-party lenses. Now, that's not to say we can't use electronic third-party lenses on the Canon RF cameras. The problem is we're pretty much stuck at that point using EF lenses. For instance, on the R7, pretty much the best lenses I've used on that camera are the Sigma Art lenses that are all EF mount, which means I'm using an adapter. Now, it's not the end of the world. Sometimes I like using an adapter like Canon's variable ND adapter. Part of the reason a lot of us have moved to mirrorless is the fact that not only is there better perceived image quality in video and photos, better functions, but by moving to mirrorless, we're also promised to get much smaller camera bodies, much smaller lenses, so much smaller profiles. With being stuck using all of Canon's options in the RF line, we're limited in what we can use on the Canon side of things. So I think if Canon doesn't start figuring out how to license their RF lens mount, even if it's really expensive, they're going to start losing customers, because companies like Sigma, I'm sure, do want to put out RF lenses. Tamron. There are companies that will put out really solid RF lenses, and yes, they will compete with the Canon RF lenses, but competition is great because we all flourish because of it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next year, especially after this news is coming out that they are doing this to some of these third-party companies. They have every right to, don't get me wrong, but as a customer, I think there's going to be a tipping point where if people start really wanting to use the mirrorless lenses, they may start moving to other camera brands if Canon doesn't get their stuff together. If you have any questions, comments, concerns on this article, let me know in the comments below. And if you got knowledge and value out of today's video, please make sure to hit that like, subscribe, and notification bell to keep up to date with the latest videos on the channel. Until next time, my name is Geoff Fagien. Thank you for watching, everybody, and I will see you in the next video.